Hi, welcome back to the Empowering Peer Educators podcast. Today we are with our head educator, the lovely Maddie. Hello, Maddie. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk to you about all things consent. Thanks for being with us today. And for those of you at home watching, please make sure you have your formative assessment questions out pertaining to this episode so that you can fill them in as we're chatting. So to begin, I just want to ask you about what consent in sexual situations actually is and looks like, because I feel like most of us loosely understand what
Yeah.
consent looks like. Maybe we think we know what it is, but we don't have a super clear definition. So can you
Yeah.
give us a super clear definition?
Absolutely. I think me personally, I don't like to give here is the beginning, middle, and end kind of definition. I like to think about it in components though. So consent is clear, coherent, ongoing, and willing. And if you would like, I can break all four of those down or do that later on.
That's perfect. Please break them down.
Perfect. So clear is a hell yeah. It's fuck yes, I'm into this. It's an enthusiastic yes, or it's at least a confident yes. It's not an it's not an I don't know, it's not maybe, and it's definitely not silent. Coherent. So this one can be a little tricky because there are people in my position that will talk about coherent and be like, well, absolutely no alcohol, absolutely no drugs of any kind can be in somebody's system. Otherwise, consent can't be navigated. And I just personally call bullshit on that because A, this is a college campus. B, I'm also a grown ass adult who's experienced life before. And there are individuals who can have a few beers, have a little bit of a substance of some kind, and still be able to navigate consent. However, it does add a layer of complexity that absolutely requires us to be paying attention, to be getting curious, and communicating with each other. And what I think is really important to talk about when we talk about coherent is that there's a lot of things to impact this, of two Coors Lights in an hour is completely different than two martinis in an hour.
Right, exactly. Especially if you're at brigade or something.
Oh my gosh, especially depending on where you're drinking those martinis. Exactly. And then there's a difference between just drinking Coors Lights all night, drinking IPAs all night.
Right.
Those are gonna kick somebody in the ass potentially. Or if somebody's like, but we drank the same amount, I don't understand. And it's like, well, was it a Maddie-sized person and a football-sized person drinking the same amount?
It's not going to affect you.
It's just not going to be the same. And so it requires us, again, to be paying attention and asking questions and really trying to understand, is this person physically present with me? Well, also emotionally and mentally present with me? Because what's so important to also understand is that we all show being too drunk differently. And that is such an important realization because some people don't get the classic stumbling, slurred speech. Those are great signs to look out for. But some people are a little bit more subtle, or it just has something to do with their personality shifts a little bit, or wow, they don't dance and they're dancing now. They must be lit. It just depends. And again, if we're not talking about it, if we're not paying attention, we're gonna miss the signs that somebody's not actually here with us.
Right. Those are all so great. Thank you so much. I love that you're getting into the real world examples of what we need to be looking out for and just the nuances in different situations.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to get to kind of the why with consent, because I think some people may think, I've been in a relationship with this person for years. I don't need to continuously be checking in. I know them better than that. But we still want to make sure that we're getting that affirmative consent regardless of the context of the relationship, because there's other factors within affirmative consent that don't have to do with just knowing the person, their history.
Oh, so absolutely.
I'd love for you to talk about some of the other reasons why it's so important to get consent other than just checking that box.
Absolutely. And I think what'll be important to throw in there is that affirmative consent also includes this ongoing piece. So it means that just because it was yes on Sunday doesn't mean it's a yes for all eternity. Just because it was a yes to oral sex doesn't mean it's a yes to everything you could possibly do with another human being. And that is super relevant in a relationship, especially in relationships where maybe you're going to be mixing things up, or you're going to go from, we started here, but I want to go over here now, or I want to do this thing. That's relevant in any sexual interaction, and it's incredibly relevant in that long-term relationship where people's preferences change, day-to-day things change, like people want to try new things, they don't want to try new things. Like there's just this ongoing piece that is so important to remember. And especially we need to remember that in relationships, you're allowed to say no, you're allowed to not want to have sex, you're allowed to have boundaries around sex, you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to be like, yes, I'm into this. Let's try it out. And then like, never mind.
I'm good. I'm actually good. Thank you.
So we'll talk about setting boundaries in a future episode. But something that's important to remember is that we don't need to give excuses or reasons to that no. Like so, that can be really scary, especially when we're getting intimate with somebody. It's vulnerable. All this stuff. We have to feel like, why are we changing our minds? And like we have to say it. No is a complete sentence. We're allowed to just say no.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember relevant, again, long-term relationship, not long-term relationship, but there's this willing component of affirmative consent where it means people are not threatened into it. They're not coerced into it. They're not worn down into giving that yes. They're not like, but we haven't had sex in 2 weeks. That's not willing. That's not guilt. That's manipulating, guilting somebody.
Yeah, how is that relevant?
Yeah, like, I don't understand the point of that statement. So what does that have to do with right now? And so we really have to be mindful that willing is a crucial piece in all sexual experiences and still relevant even if you're in a long-term relationship. And to kind of highlight what you were talking about, like kind of a person's why going beyond checking the box. If your why is in the right place, quote unquote, meaning you're getting consent, not to just check the box, not just because Maddie told you to do it, but you're getting it because of the mutual experience, because you're getting it because you care about the person, this ongoing piece is going to come so naturally. It's not going to be this like homework assignment where you're like, oh wait, did I do all the parts? It's just going to flow because your head is already in that space of thinking about the other person. It's already in that space of wanting to make sure that we're on the same page and having a good time. So all these parts of consent flow naturally when our why for getting consent is in the right place. And the reason the checkbox mentality kind of scares me is because that's a one and done. You checked the box. You asked for consent. They said yes. You think you're done. You checked your box. Now it's just a free-for-all. And that kind of loses the ongoing piece a little bit. That might lose some of the coherent pieces a little bit. But we got consent.
It ruins the nuance of the situation completely.
Yeah, exactly.
That totally makes sense. And then on that piece of different relationships, I really want to talk about how the nature of consent is different in different relationships. So, for example, a one night stand versus someone that you've known a long time. Can you talk a little bit about the gray areas of consent where there's ambiguity, some context that might arise that you're not entirely prepared for, maybe you don't fully understand?
Absolutely. And what I want to start by saying is that I am not here to kink shame people. I'm not here to shit on one night stands or hookup culture, anything like that. What I am here to highlight is that getting consent when you know the person versus when you know nothing about the person looks different. And what looks different is you have to talk a hell of a lot more. You got to use so many more words and ask a lot more questions when you don't know the person because you know nothing about their interests, their boundaries, their past. Like you don't know what they're bringing to the table because you don't know them. And so that's why consent will probably look a little bit more robust when it's someone you don't know versus when you already have a history with somebody. It doesn't mean you stop getting consent, but it means you probably already have a good idea about what they like. So then you don't have to go through the litany of like all the questions and stuff like that.
I know what you're okay with and what you're not okay with for the most part.
Exactly. And you have a better read on their body language. Mm-hmm. So you're going to know more intimately what's a sign that they're into this and that they're not into this. And like, although there are overt like body language, nonverbal cues that people can give, like this means yes, this means no. I still encourage people when they're first exploring sex, when they're with somebody they don't know, when they're practicing affirmative consent and building that skill set for like the very first time, to rely on verbal communication. Because we're actually really bad at picking up on nonverbals, especially when maybe we're a little stressed out and we're maybe a little bit worried of, is this suave? Do I look good while I'm doing this? I don't know. Maybe we're in our head a little bit. And then we're going to think we're also an expert at reading this person we barely
And
know.
they're like this.
Yeah. So it's just like we can't just rely on nonverbals. And I encourage people to really encourage them to get more of that verbal yes while they're practicing. And that can look different in a long term relationship because it's like you do have a better read. You have this different comfort level with them. Maybe there's more trust there. So now they're more willing to share more information, be actually truly expressive with their body language. So it just looks different in those two different relationships.
Totally. What are some strategies you'd suggest for addressing these gray areas? Like
Yeah.
anything other than that verbal communication to ensure that there's mutual understanding and respect there?
I mean, I think, and I don't know if this is where we're going to be getting into it a little bit later, but we do all of ourselves a disservice by only practicing communication, only practicing affirmative consent in the moment when we need it. That's so stressful. Like, it would be like walking into a Calc 3 exam and we hadn't even passed Calc 2 yet, or calculus, or actually we're still in pre-cal. Like, it'd be so stressful because we don't know. We don't know what we need to do. We don't know what tools to use. We like our brain is top notch stressed out because we haven't practiced. We haven't built that skill set at all. But that's what we do time and time again. We only practice consent when it's the most vulnerable time, when the stakes are high, pressure's on to be good.
It's the championship game, and all of a sudden
Exactly.
you're just in.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what? I don't even play football. Like, what is this? And so I think we do all of ourselves just a huge disservice when, like, yeah, okay, affirmative consent, got it. I'll practice that later.
Mm.
Ooh, that stresses me out. Yeah.
And then it's extra awkward, right? Because you
Yeah,
haven't touched on those things that you needed to touch on before you're
exactly.
in that moment.
Exactly.
And so
Yep.
that's kind of what I want to get into next is just we talked a little bit about the when and how
Yeah.
it shouldn't just be in that moment. And how would you address getting into those conversations earlier
Yeah.
and not just in prime time?
Exactly. Love that. Love the way to describe that. So I think one like tangible skill that I've been kind of exploring with people is this idea of a will want won't list. And so the heart behind it is that the will part is the these are the things I'm into. I know I like these things. The want part is the well, I'm willing to try these things if it's the right day, the right time, the right person. I'm not stressed out. I have to be stressed out in order to try those things. It's kind of, there's a little bit more, the conditions have to be right on the want. And then the won't is the absolutely not, these are my hard boundaries. I think that's just like whether you're not in a relationship right now, you're not going to be in a relationship for years, like whatever it is, you could still have and create a will, want, won't list right now because it builds your language for talking about these things and it helps you understand your own needs. Maybe it even helps you understand your own gaps where you're like, I like maybe you start looking at this and you're like, actually, I don't know. And I don't even know where to begin. Like it can help you understand where you are in your own journey with your own consent with things and that like self-awareness, like that information is beautiful and wonderful. What's also helpful is that if you already have that information, that's something now you don't necessarily have to worry about. So when it comes to having a conversation with somebody else about what they're into, if they're willing to give consent, you have a platform that like a foundation that you're already standing on, like this comfort level, this skill set. You're not just like, I think I like this. You already know. And you can model how to express that and create this opportunity for them to have that option as well. What can be beautiful is that if you are in a relationship or a situationship or insert any kind of dynamic, what you could do is offer like, hey, I want us both to create a will want won't list, or I want us all to create a
I
will
love
want won't
that.
list. Yes.
Love that.
And then make sure you guys are doing it not with each other. That's my recommendation because we don't want to be pressuring each other. We don't want to be like looking at other people's yeah, like, oh, what are you into? We want to make sure that it's authentically us. And then when you guys have date night or whenever you guys circle back on this, you already have things written down. So in that moment, it's not like you have to again think of the things you like, think of what like what was that thing I really wasn't into, but whatever. It's like it's all right here. And it can again lower that pressure and you guys can just talk to each other and just be there with each other.
That sounds like a great activity
Yeah.
for self reflection, self
Yep.
empowerment, just getting to know yourself
Yep.
better. on a certain level. I love that. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
great. And that's not something super normalized, is
Not
it?
at all. Like, and I think that's again the disservices we do to ourselves in so many ways in society. But I do think sometimes I think people honestly might find it a little weird. Like when I talk about a will want won't list, I'm like, what? I'm just supposed to write that down and put it where, Maddie? Or like, what are you talking about? And it's
Like,
like,
what if my roommates find it?
yeah, exactly. And I'm like, I do like I get the social maybe embarrassment or just the mental barriers we give ourselves, but it is I think that's more a product of the shame culture that exists within society surrounding sex and not inherently anything about sex that makes it feel weird. It's just the way we talk about sex, the way we don't talk about sex in society.
Right, the taboo
The
of it all
taboo.
and the
Yeah.
shame. You're
Yep.
scared. It's
Yeah.
scary to
It's
talk
scary.
about.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything in terms of healthy communication with your partner too about these things other than like the will want
Yeah.
list that you recommend trying or doing, or just things like trust, respect, things like that?
Yeah, I think recognizing that, like we've talked about, this can be a scary conversation. It's a super vulnerable conversation. And we have to recognize that if we are going to step into this kind of conversation, we have to be mentally ready to hear answers that maybe we don't like or that we don't want to hear.
That's a great point.
And that's a skill. Like, that's a skill that translates to so many areas of our life. There's things our professors are going to say to us that we don't agree with. Our bosses are going to say to us that we just did not need to hear that day. Somebody on the street, somebody on social media. Like, there's just any time in our life, we have to build this skill set for, like, okay, I have this expectation. Life might not reach that expectation. And that doesn't mean we then start guilt tripping the other person to see the world the way we do or to want them to do what we want to do. We have to step into these conversations willing to have it not go all according to plan, essentially, especially if we're coming in with that will, want, won't list. Maybe there'll be this beautiful moment where they look exactly the same. It's like, oh shit.
Probably not.
Probably not. And so we have to be able to understand each other's boundaries, be willing to respect those boundaries. And sometimes that just emotionally can be difficult to do. So I think stepping in with the right mindset. I also think when it comes to communication and understanding things like trust and intimacy, there's this mythbuster I usually do with in presentations where we talk about, okay, does sexual performance automatically mean sexual pleasure? Like those are the things. So like sexual performance, you're like, I already know the answer.
I've been there.
And like it's like sexual performance. People they mean like they've got the moves or they know this, that, and the other thing, and that automatically means the other person's going to have an orgasm. And it's like that's not actually the case. And that's actually it's been fascinating to have that conversation with people in presentations because some people get it right away. Some people eventually get it. And then some people are like, I don't believe you. I'm like, that's fine. But let's talk about what some researchers have been saying, because this isn't just Maddie making this shit up. Like, what they're talking about is that when we actually communicate with each other, that leads to a better time, which makes sense because we're on the same page. Makes sense because if I know what my partner likes and my partner knows what I like, and then we both follow up on that, that's just basic math.
It's cause and effect.
Exactly. I was like circling back to that like calculus 3 exam. We're like unprepared. We don't got to worry about that. This is the easiest math you'll ever have to do in college.
We're doing 2 plus 2.
Yeah, exactly. That's where we're at, y'all, when we actually talk to each other. And also like knowing about like trust and affection, like those things can exist in hookups. Those things can exist when we barely know each other. It looks like asking for consent. That builds trust. Respecting people's boundaries, that builds trust. Just being nice, that can build trust. So trust doesn't have to be like, oh, I finally have known this person for 25 years. So now we have enough trust to have a good time when we sleep together. It can mean a little bit more than just that. And so I think that's important to remember.
It's building it.
It's building it, and we build that through our actions and following through on what we say we will and won't do.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been wonderful. I love having you here. You're the expert on all things like this, so I love it. Is there anything else relating to consent that you feel like is important for our educators to hear, or just anything in general that you feel like is important?
I think the more we just talk about affirmative consent, the more we boast all about all the examples of how consent is fun, how it is sexy. There's still so much of this rhetoric that consent is only ever awkward and it only ever kills the mood. When actually, in my experiences, whether it's talking to people, reflecting on my own life, consent is the spark that either lights the fire or it's the thing that actually makes the flames burn brighter. It's not the thing that douses it. And so the more that us as educators and just people in our lives, just if we talk about it that way, like that's how we change the cultural narrative about consent. Right now, I think we're still kind of in this like, okay, it's this formal, rigid thing we have to do, and it's kind of boring. Then we'll get to the good stuff. When consent can be a part of the good stuff, and it should be. And so I really want to make sure that when we're talking about consent, that that's how we're talking about it because that's how it is, and it's just so important to remember that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be fun
Yeah,
at the end of the
exactly.
day.
Exactly. Yep.
Sweet. Well, we're gonna do some role playing scenarios, and you guys are gonna have some scenarios at home. So follow along with those. Put your answers in. There are no wrong answers. Hopefully, after this.
Yeah.
And we can get into some scenarios now.
Fantastic. Sounds great. Oh my gosh, like I've had the worst fucking day. Can I like bitch to you for a second?
Um, I don't think I can do it today. I've also had the worst day. I had like 3 exams. I was crying all morning.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you for being honest. Hope you take care of yourself.
Thank you for respecting my boundaries. I appreciate
Anytime.
you. Hey, I have great news.
Okay.
My friend thinks you're so cute. She wants your number. I said I might give it to her. Is that okay with you?
I'd actually really rather you not give it to her.
That's totally okay. I probably shouldn't have said that I would give it to her in the first place.
sorry that puts you in a weird situation, but yeah, I'd really rather her not.
I'll totally go talk to her. Not your problem at all. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, thank you.